Hi again for like the whole 5 minutes that I've not been talking to you guys. Well, actually, right now we're taking a pretty big departure. I was just talking about Labyrinth, which is all cool, shiny over there. And now I'm taking a bit of a departure and talking about criminal profiling with horror villains. It does say anime villains, that's actually going to be tomorrow. So this is strictly horror. And what's fun about this is it's something I always think of as trying to understand the monsters under your bed and in your head. Because with this, I actually take horror movie villains and I go through and I actually give them a psychological diagnosis and I kind of explain how those steps are made. So it's, I think, pretty interesting. Hey, Nora? Woman?
Yeah, her audio is connecting.
Oh, okay. I'll have to bug her later. Nora, you there? She'll bug in later. So with this, if you're expecting this panel to be anything like The Mentalist or Criminal Minds, then this is definitely the wrong panel for you. It's nothing like that. That kind of stuff is really great for TV. That's not at all how you get an accurate portrayal or an accurate diagnosis. It's all cool, quick, and easy, where you just look at someone and 5 seconds later, you know all about them. Reality, it's not that simple, and labeling someone and giving them a diagnosis and doing all that really should never be that simple. So if you're wondering what my qualifications are for this, because I have a lot of people who wonder why I'm diagnosing people. Well, actually, I have a master's in clinical psychology. Yeah, that scares me too. But yeah, that's the thing I have. So I actually no longer hold the position where I do intakes and diagnose. I got a higher paying job where I like to read lots of medical records, but it's something where I still work with people who have diagnoses on a regular basis. I'm regularly going through and reading those things, but it's actually a lot of fun because knowing about the diagnoses helps you work with people better. But I did previously have a job where I did intakes where I was diagnosing people on a regular basis. I have interned as counselor in training at the Greene County Jail as well as the Fordland Prison. And I used to work in the criminal justice system. I actually did that for 6 years. I worked as a probation officer and I also worked in secure detention. So needless to say, I kind of know my stuff on that. Now, before we get started, there's something I want to make sure that everybody knows. With this, no self-diagnosing. Self-diagnosing is not allowed. A lot of people, when they're hearing about psychology, they start thinking, oh, well, that sounds like me. Don't do that. That just leads to problems. Another thing is this is entirely for fun. I just want to let you know most people with mental health conditions and mental diagnoses are completely safe. They are not dangerous. This is just showing you how it works with criminals as far as on the horror villain side, and it gives you an idea. And I want to make sure you know that because I don't want anyone getting demonized. And Nora? Can I keep hearing your mic go off. Never mind. So I'm going to start off with. Okay, well, before I go on, this is my friend Nora. She's kind of jumping in. She's good for bantering back and forth with. What's fun about her is she's a normie. So this is fun to bounce off of. And she's not at all a horror movie film fan. And it's kind of fun because neither is Zach. So I'm kind of the lone wolf on this one. But with Nora, she's hey, it's nothing wrong with that. But Nora is so far that I have always called her Ninja Barbie because she is by far one of the girliest people I know. So getting her to chime in on this can be fun.
Nora, real quick, are you wanting to add your video to this call?
I'm gonna go ahead and say no because my phone keeps going in and out.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was intentional. Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right, so you guys go ahead.
Okay, so first character we're going to be talking about is Jason Voorhees. So with Jason, I absolutely love him. He's a great character through all the films. But if we're going to start looking at how to diagnose him, something we want to start looking at is his past and his present. So with this, we're going to start looking at his past. So Jason, at the age of 11 years old, died. His parents were Pamela Voorhees and Elias Voorhees. You only find out his dad's name and information about his dad really in the comic version. So that's something you have to dig a little bit deeper for. His background is he was ostracized due to his appearance. He had a deformed face. He didn't look like everyone else, so he got teased a lot. He wasn't treated well. He really got pushed to the side and marginalized. So he was mocked by other children, and he didn't have friends, which of course makes camp difficult because he's not able to interact with him and have that fun like other kids are. He attended camp over at Camp Crystal Lake, and he drowned while swimming. And the reason he drowned was because no one was paying attention to him. None of the other kids were paying attention, and the camp counselors were busy in the shack having fun together. And needless to say, that didn't end well for them. So his parental profile, if we're thinking about his parent, how this is, Elias Voorhees, his father, was abusive towards his mother, Pamela. He actually ends up later, though, pushing her to the point where she gets so upset with him that she gets killed by her. So he is mommy dearest kill number 1. For Pamela Voorhees, just to give us a little idea about background on that, she displays some symptoms of dissociative identity disorder in the first movie. Now, something that's interesting with this is whenever she's talking, she'll be threatening the people, and she'll be going, "Kill him, mommy, kill him, mommy." And she'll be alternating between that and her regular voice. So it leads the viewers to think that she's talking as a young Jason. Now, with this, other personalities, and her other personality manifests as Jason, but this is very rare. If you're actually looking at real dissociative identity disorder, it's very, very, very odd for the character and for the different identities to even be aware of each other, let alone be able to communicate with each other. And she speaks as Jason, she answers herself, and that's not something that would happen. But it's a good movie, so we're going to go with it. So Pamela Voorhees, just talking a little bit more about her, she blamed others for the death of her son. She didn't take any accountability in it. And Nora, can I get you to mute your mic? Mute! Dame desu. Baka desu. So she blamed others for the death of her son. She didn't take any accountability for it. She was actually working in the kitchen at the time. And it's something where she wasn't there to watch him, so she blamed everyone else. And because of that, it led to some issues with her. So what she do later on? She becomes obsessed with this idea. She becomes very upset. So she does the sensible thing, in her opinion. She kills the people responsible. She kills the workers at the camp. And what happens is whenever the camp tries reopening, she keeps killing the counselors because those counselors are bad. So you're bad too because my son died and I'm going to blame you. Makes perfect sense in her head. And her weapons of choice, this is kind of interesting for a horror movie villain. As far as characters who kill usually have kind of a set MO. They keep using the same things over and over. But her weapons of choice, she uses poison, she uses knife, she uses cunning. And something that's kind of cool about the first movie is that Jason wasn't actually the bad guy, Mommy was. And Mom was the villain in the first movie.
Was she really?
So Jason doesn't even show up until the very end, and that's entirely due to makeup effects. But she also kills Kevin Bacon. And what's hilarious about this to me, other than getting distracted by Bacon, because I do, is whenever you see the blood coming out, someone was actually underneath them, and they were supposed to have a syringe that was supposed to be pumping out the blood, but that kind of got to where it wasn't working. So I think this is the film. Of course, I could be getting wrong. I like horror movies way too much, but I think this is the one where one special effects people actually had to be underneath blowing it through, and it was lamb's blood, and it actually got all over their face. So gross, but cool. So if we're thinking about diagnosing vitals, I'm diagnosing Jason. We want to know some things about him. So his vitals, how's his blood pressure, how's his weight, all that. Well, none of it. He's dead. So we don't have to worry about a pulse rate. We don't have to worry about blood pressure. His age is kind of a murky area because he's dead, but I don't know if he's alive, but he dies as an 11-year-old and he comes back as a big, burly, tall man. And depending on the movie and the actor that they're using, heights may vary. But because of this, he died at 11, so we're just going to treat this as if we're diagnosing an 11-year-old. So his presenting problems, things that are odd about him that we would be concerned about if we're going to be diagnosing him like we would a client. So first of all, he won't stay dead. He kind of has Goku syndrome, so Zach, you might appreciate that. He keeps forgetting he's dead, keeps coming back and interacting with people depending on the movie. So with this, his hobbies, he enjoys going through killing teenagers and any adults who get in the way, and occasionally even a pregnant woman. So if you're a Predator fan, Predator would not approve of that. And one thing I found interesting about this is for all the characters that Jason will and does kill, he won't kill puppies, which is something I find kind of odd and endearing. So his weapons of choice, just like Mommy, he's pretty versatile. He uses an ice pick, he uses harpoons, machetes, spears, a pitchfork at one point. I mean, at one point, he even uses a bed as a murder weapon. He finds two people on it, finds it, picks it up, and folds it in half. So, interesting murder.
I mean, a very resourceful man. And also, contrary to popular belief, I actually am not a huge fan of Dragon Ball, but Goku said to him, correct me if I'm wrong, that just means he's nigh immortal, correct?
He just keeps coming back. You can't kill him. So, that's kind of fun.
I mean, I got to give the guy A for effort, but all right, back to no video.
Okay, sorry. Jump in wherever you want. So if we're looking at other things that he kind of struggles with is he's fearful of the water. If you have different scenes, and this also comes up in Freddy versus Jason, is whenever he sees water, he starts backing away from it. He loses his power at one point entirely around water. And in Freddy versus Jason, there's a scene where there's actually a waterfall, and you see Jason in front of it, big, burly, strong guy. Well, suddenly it switches, and he's a small child again. So water for him is definitely an issue because he died in it. That's one of his problems. He also has a deteriorating body. So in Friday the 13th, which was the second movie, Jason actually still looked relatively healthy. I mean, he had flesh-colored skin. From what you could see, he actually had some long brown hair that was coming out of one side of his head at least. He did have hair on his arms, so you could see some of that healthy, normal glow that people would have. And with that, he was wearing a sack where you could actually still see at least one of his eyes. And with that, that eye still looked healthy. I mean, it looked like it was white. It didn't have any kind of weird discoloration, nothing like that. And the problem with that, though, is we start out with that healthy one, but by later ones, he becomes much misshapen, he becomes stockier, he looks more monstrous. And one thing is this could be actually a result of him being killed so often. It could just be all the terrible things that happen to him. You know, oh, he's killing people, how dare he? So there's some different theories for that, but it's kind of fun to look at. But it's interesting when we're looking at diagnosing him. So some things are continuing with this. So he wasn't exactly the most attractive person whenever he was alive. It only gets worse whenever he's dead, so much so that whenever he's dead, he actually ends up covering his face when he comes back. So he hides his face behind his mask. He shifts his personality from there being no indication that he ever had a personality. So there's some issues there where, are there self-awareness? Is there not? Because as a kid, he didn't cover his face. Later on, he does. But something that's really interesting about this character is, for as much as his mom was obsessed with protect Jason, got to blame everyone for hurting Jason, he is just as protective and just as loyal to his mom. So what's he do whenever he comes back to life from the dead? He creates a shrine to his mom, complete with her head front and center, because nothing says Mother's Day like her head on a platter. But hey, he actually thought it was his mother when Pamela, one of the characters in the second movie, actually holds up her head and puts it over her own while she's trying to wear Mom's sweater to try to trick Jason into not killing her. And he was initially controlled by Freddy later on when Freddy versus Jason, and also later on in some of the comic books, whenever Freddy took the form of Mom and was using it to tell Jason what to do. So here are some questions before we actually get to the diagnosis. Why do you think that whenever we're doing diagnoses, it's good to know about family history? So why would we want to know something about the person that we're diagnosing as far as what their family's like?
All right, let's give it a couple seconds to see for the delay to kick in so people can answer. I'm going to personally guess it's because it runs through their genetics.
Good answer. That's part of it.
Okay. All right. I'm on the board.
Yeah. I mean, there were some other answers too, so I don't know if anyone else has some ideas on that, but I can give it a few.
Okay, yeah, give it a sec. This is actually very interesting so far. I learning a lot so far. I didn't know Jason Voorhees was actually that dynamic of a character.
Oh, this is actually how movies get broken down in my household. I'm a huge horror fan. You should see my house around Halloween. It's fantastic.
So give me a quick 30 seconds as to why you like horror movies so much.
Well, I love them because they are the perfect example of good versus evil. But what I like about them is the fact that they're honest enough to admit that evil does win. Another thing is that they're not held to the same standards as a lot of other films or a lot of other genres. They don't have to be PC. They don't have to be apologetic. They can be as raw and dirty as they want. And we accept it because that's how the film is. Also, it has a lot of connotations as far as it tells us a lot about a culture. So depending on the different cultures, their horror movies are different because what they view as frightening, what they view as scary, or as something that's completely sacrilegious is different. So they're pretty interesting.
Wow, not the answer I thought you were going to give. I just thought you were going to say, because I like him. But then again, I've been talking with you for enough time now to know that, you don't just half your answers. All right. So we've got Matt Cook. He said it could show genetic patterns or illnesses, which, like that. Michi said, isn't this the nurture versus nature kind of question? And then one of our Visioncon reps said it's the environment they grew up in and the environment their family grew up in.
All correct. So it's all good to know because with certain diagnoses, it's actually statistically more likely for you to develop that as well as long as if you're a kid. Now, it's not a guarantee, but if we're just looking at stats, that's something that comes up. The nature versus nurture that was mentioned, that's something that's huge too, because if you're around those things and if you're around discord and issues, if you're not around a stable, loving family, how are you going to be able to necessarily know that and what's normal for that person who's lived in a chaotic environment versus someone who's lived in the suburbs in this wonderful, great place? They're going to have very different standards of life. They're going to have very different outlooks in life. So we want to consider that. This one is something I'll just kind of give away rather than having the delay because I want to make sure we have enough time for the other characters too. Is one of the things that I think is great about this second movie is that in it, he's actually wearing a sack over his head. And I'm going to keep kind of talking and explain this in case anyone does want to answer this. But he comes out, he's wearing this burlap sack, and all you see is his eyes sticking out. Now, at the time, there was something interesting going on in history that made it so frightening, really, for them to be filming that on set. And also, if you know the history of it, whenever you're watching the movie, it makes it kind of snap in your head and go like, oh my God, why? So does anyone know why it was frightening for him to actually wear a sack over his head in the second movie, rather than the hockey mask or anything else that came in later on?
Okay, let's wait for a minute. So just to clarify, why it was frightening for Jason to wear the mask to us, or for him to be wearing the mask to him?
For people on the set and people in reality, like in the real world, why would it be frightening to have that going on?
Oh, okay, I got you.
This one's pretty obscure. Not a lot of people get it.
Okay, Michi said the KKK?
Actually, no, they're scary in their own way.
Well,
this is actually something that happened in true history. At the time, there was actually an escaped, I can't remember, it was a mental patient or a convict. It was one of the two, who was actually going around wearing a burlap sack over their head, similar cutout eye pattern, and was killing people. And this was happening in reality. And at the same time, they were filming this movie with the character doing that. So if you know your history of serial killers, that is a frightening connection.
Yeah, I was about to say, Matt Cook actually just messaged based on an actual serial killer during that time.
Yes.
Yes.
100%. And it's scary as hell. I mean, imagine going to work. And here's a question that I've always had and I will rant about. How did he get so big? He was an 11-year-old boy when he died. Second movie, he comes back and he's a hulking, gigantic man. And I don't know how that works. I mean, there must be some kind of chemicals in that water or something. So if we're looking at diagnosing him, remember, we're talking about an 11-year-old. We can't view him as an adult, even though he looks like one, because we're treating him like an 11-year-old because that's how old he was when he died. So he couldn't continue developmentally after that. So we're going to look at conduct disorder. So if we're looking at the DSM to diagnose someone, these are some of the things we're looking for. So do they often bully, threaten, or intimidate others? Well, yeah, he definitely does that. He's intimidating on a regular basis. He often initiates physical fights. He's not just initiating them. He is going out and pushing people. He is killing people. He also used weapons that would cause harm to others. So that's one of those possibilities as well. Do you think this counts as being physically cruel to people? Well, if decapitating them, slicing them, folding them in half doesn't count as cruel, I don't know what does. And he does break into people's houses, which is one of those things as well. So he meets 5 out of 15 criteria to be diagnosed with conduct disorder in this. he only needed to exhibit 3. But that's not the only thing, because if we're thinking about this, remember some of those presenting problems I talked about earlier. Another thing he has is a specific phobia of water. And things that we would look at to be able to diagnose him with this is he's fearful about being around water, and it often provokes anxiety and immediate fear. We see that in Freddy versus Jason, where he actually physically becomes a child again. Does he actively avoid water and endure it only when we must? Yeah, most of the time. Some of the movies, they break that rule, but some of the time, most of the time, that's how it is. Is his fear out of proportion with the actual danger? Yes. He's usually quite safe around water. He's usually okay until he gets, sucked into fan belts and things like that, or propellers rather. Has the phobia of water lasted longer than 6 years? Heck, it's lasted longer than that movie franchise-wise. I'm sorry, 6 months. It's lasted longer than that by far. He just keeps having that issue. And has it caused significant distress for Jason? And it does cause significant distress for him. Because you can have a lot of these things, but if it doesn't bother you, it may not actually qualify as a diagnosis. With him, you can tell it bothers him based upon his reactions. So that's what I've got for Jason. And now I'm going to move on to my favorite horror movie character, Freddy. Freddy is a character that I always have and always will love. But whenever I'm talking about Freddy Krueger, I have to be very clear on something. I'm talking about Freddy Krueger, not Rorschach. Freddy. So don't talk to me about that new guy. I hate that movie. I don't want to see it. I want the original movie franchise. Robert Englund, all the way. That is the only way I will consider this. So if we're talking about Freddy Krueger, he's also a pretty in-depth character. His age at death was 32. His mother was Amanda Krueger. His father was 100 maniacs. So his mother gets trapped in this place over a weekend, no way to get out, and she is raped repeatedly over this weekend by 100 maniacs. And I have a strong suspicion that the one that was actually played by Robert Englund is actually his dad, but hey, it's more interesting to think of him as being spliced together all together like that. And if his natural birth family wasn't strange enough with his mother, not being able to keep him because she's insane and walling herself inside walls, his adopted father was Mr. Underwood, played by Alice Cooper, because that seems like fun. So if we're looking at his parental profile, so if we're looking at his parents and how they treated him and how they were, his birth father, was housed in a mental institution. We can't verify for sure which one it was, although we have a strong suspicion. So we may not know the official diagnosis or that, but we know that he's diagnosed with something, and we're pretty sure that there were some crimes committed based upon what implications there are for people who were in that institution. His mother was a nun who was raped repeatedly. She gave Freddy up for adoption, and she reportedly committed suicide, but later on we found out that her body was just walled up in a room because, yeah, that's apparently what you do. But needless to say, he didn't have the strongest relationship or even knowledge about them. His adoptive father, so the person who could have helped him and really changed his life around, not so helpful. He was an alcoholic. He was verbally abusive. He was physically abusive. He actually would beat Freddy with a belt. He was not forming any strong or lasting relationships. He wasn't teaching him how to have those. So needless to say, Freddy didn't have that. So later on, the very first person that Freddy kills is Daddy Dearest. He kills him with a razor. But later on, Freddy has something of a life. He actually marries his wife, Loretta Krueger. They were high school sweethearts. They come out and go, aww. Okay, no one else did it, but I always like it. So he absolutely loved her, and he was very happy with her until she went poking around and found all the terrible things he was doing as far as the evidence. So he did the natural thing that you do with the love of your life. He strangled her to death because, yeah, I don't know. But that's what happens. The problem with this is as he's killing his wife, his daughter, Catherine Krueger, who later is known as Maggie Burroughs, she shows up as a character later on, witnesses this. So he not only loses his wife in that moment, he also loses his daughter. Now, with this, his daughter represses the memories, but later on, where she shows up, she actually ends up having this thing. So she actually kills her own father later on in one of the sequels. Don't worry, he comes back. That's what Freddy does. But needless to say, that using your father's own glove to murder him with, not the best family reunion. So needless to say, family relationships not very good or strong. So more personal history. His real name is actually Frederick Krueger, not Freddy. He lacked close friends as a child. They actually mocked him. They made fun of him. They would yell out, "Son of 100 maniacs." Not the best place for your kid. So if you're looking for a school or a daycare, don't go there. Something else about Freddy is he was, even at a young age, abusive towards animals. He actually took out a pet hamster in the middle of class, in front of a class, and just kept hammering it and killed the animal in front of everyone. What I find interesting about that is no one even tried to stop him. So upon reaching adulthood, Freddy killed 20 children. Now, like a lot of killers, and this is something that actually does happen in real life if you're looking at serial killers, so for people who like that, this is something that does happen. He liked to keep souvenirs and trophies, but with him, it was in the form of pictures. So this indicates that since he was keeping these trophies, he thought he was above the law. He thought that he couldn't be caught, because if you're keeping those trophies, that's something that indicates that you think that you're okay and you're in the clear, because otherwise, why would you keep evidence? He gets killed by the parents of those victims whenever they find out who it is. But upon dying, he makes a pact with dream demons who give him all this wonderful power. So upon returning, he becomes an evil spirit, and he starts killing the children of the people who killed him, because in some ways that's an interesting just rationale. So one of the things that's interesting about him, though, is he draws his power from being remembered. So if you really want to make sure that your friends are safe and Freddy's showing up in your dream and he's trying to kill you, don't tell anyone about it, and definitely don't mention his name. But what do teenagers do? They talk to each other, and that's something that happens. Something that's also interesting about Freddy is how much he takes joy in killing people. So he gives them each personalized fearscapes. He doesn't have just a murder room that he goes to. Each person has their own specially crafted hell based upon what it is that they're afraid of. He also prolongs their death for as long as he can. Now, there's a few reasons for that. One, make them remember and make them talk about you. But two, he just likes the chase. He often allows them to wake back up, spread the fear to their friends. But if I'm going to describe Freddy as any kind of animal, he'd definitely be a cat. He likes toying with the mouse before he kills it. And he also makes jokes at the most inappropriate moments at the victim's expense. But I always love that, because of all the horror movie villains, he is the only one that makes dad jokes. And no one ever talks about that. So a little bit about him. He also has Goku syndrome. He won't stay dead. But he also enjoys being the main character. He likes being the main killer. So later on in Freddy versus Jason, whenever he brings Jason back, and also in Freddy versus Jason versus Ash, whenever he's got them, he wants to be the main character. He wants to be in charge. So whenever someone starts killing his kids on his street, won't allow it. Those are his kids. So some questions about Freddy. How would you describe Freddy's family life? How would you think about that?
I mean, while we wait for people to answer, I mean, personally for me, not well.
I would say that this would be like, oh gosh, what was the name of that show that people were always fighting on?
Every show ever.
True. I was thinking it was some kind of daytime shock show. I will of course think of it as immediately after this ends. But how would people describe this? So if you were describing the family life, other than just being jacked up, is there going to be anyone?
Elizabeth said messed up.
Very true.
You know, I mean, that's fair. We're waiting. While we wait for other people, Elizabeth commented back, married with children.
Well, technically that's accurate. Oh gosh, Al Bundy with the killing gloves. That would be hilarious.
And a Visioncon representative commented, abusive, neglected.
Once again, accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So needless to say, not a strong one. And could it be a contributing factor to his behavior? The answer to that, I'm just going to go on and let you know, yes. Because if you're exposed to that on a regular basis, you're going to be around it. But here's a frightening question, and I don't know if you can share this later on, but I can give you the link if you want, Zach. There's actually a rap video he did with the Fat Boys. And by the way, there's an entire album on this. So he actually has a rap style. So if anyone wants to be truly scared, I can sense that.
Okay, are we talking new age, or are we talking one of the old?
We're talking 90s rap.
Okay. Well, not too late for Pac. Wu-Tang?
It was just, I would just call it odd.
Okay.
Like, imagine your dad rapping. That would be kind of how I'd think about it. Okay. Although I do love it, and I've watched the video I don't know how many times. So if we're looking at diagnoses for Freddy, how we would actually look at this is he would qualify for what we call antisocial personality disorder. So when we're calling someone antisocial, this is not what that is. Antisocial personality disorder is actually a little bit different. So here's some things that he meets the criteria for. He doesn't follow lawful behavior. He breaks the law on a regular basis. He's definitely irritable and aggressive. He's very impulsive. He doesn't plan ahead. He sees someone, he decides he's going to kill, and he goes for it. But first, let me create you this personalized hell. He has a reckless disregard for the safety of others, which is pretty common whenever your only goal is to kill them. He doesn't show any remorse. He's completely indifferent to people who are dying. As a matter of fact, his only concern in that point is making sure he savors every second of it. And there's also implications that he met the criteria for conduct disorder before he was 15. The reason that's important is because you can't diagnose someone as antisocial unless they have that too. So he would likely meet, if we're talking about calling him a psychopath, he would also likely meet criteria for that. But we can't diagnose him as a psychopath because that requires an entire gambit of tests that are run. And I'll be honest, I can't afford that, but I would love it if Robert Englund would do that in that character, because I would love to see how that would come out. He also would qualify for what we call narcissistic personality disorder. Now, what we're going to look at for that and how he would qualify for that, does he have grandiose or self-importance? Yes, he does. He thinks he's very important. As a matter of fact, he thinks he's pretty much the only thing that is. He's preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited power because in the dream world, he has all the power. He does require excessive admiration. As a matter of fact, unless people know about him, he doesn't exist. Does he have a sense of entitlement? Yes, this is exhibited later on where he starts fighting with Jason and he tells them that they are his kids. Those are his because they're on his street. He's very entitled. He has absolutely no empathy, and he's definitely pretty arrogant and haughty. So those are some things. Now, this is something that is debatable. It depends on the movie. If you're watching the new one that I told you to disregard, then yeah, a lot of things are confirmed. If we're talking about the older ones, we can try to deny it, but we're going to be honest and admit that we're probably wrong. So if we're looking at pedophilic disorder, non-exclusive type, that non-exclusive type means that he doesn't care if it's a girl or a boy. His victims were both. It lasted over 6 months. He also had some sexual urges that we're pretty sure he acted on. Less so in the original, more pronounced in the new one. And he was over 16 years old. So that would also be a thing. But something else that kind of goes with this to show the sexual attraction, even the original one, is, well, or at least some kind of other weird issues, is like whenever he's taking the photos and he's going to put them in his keepsake book, he'll actually take them out and lick them before putting them in. Now, taking out how weird his saliva must be that it makes everything sick, the fact that he's licking them shows some sexuality with that. It's kind of strange. So, next villain, Pinhead. I absolutely love this character. So I don't know if there are any fans out there of the Hellraiser series, but it's something that is there. So with this, we're going to be talking about Pinhead. So here we go. His actual name, when he was Peoples, was Elliot Spencer. His parents are unknown. Okay, this is where I start to rant. I hate it in stories whenever we have a character that is really interesting, we can't find out anything about their past as far as their family goes, because it makes it really hard to do what I do with that. But we do know a little bit about him. He actually served as a captain for the British during World War I. During that time, he was exposed to a lot of trauma, a lot of terrible things were happening. He witnessed death, he witnessed destruction, and keep in mind, this was the First World War. Nothing like that had ever happened on that scale before. So this is a whole new level of hell on Earth that has never existed. So this led to a real sense of personal desensitization. So with this, he becomes so desensitized that he can see these horrors, these traumas, and they have no impact on him. But he still wants to feel, he still wants to have these reactions. So he starts seeking out things to be able to help him feel and have a reaction again. So he hears about this cube, and that's what becomes his new obsession, because this is going to be the thing that helps him feel. His personal history also can going on. After solving the box, Elliot had pins driven into his head. So in that earlier picture where you actually saw all those weren't just there. Those were actually hammered into his head while he was still alive. So with this helps drive him insane. This helps drive him towards becoming a Cenobite rather than a human. So he actually completely departs from humanity and becomes this whole new thing. He actually rose to the position of lead Cenobite, and he has no memory of his previous life. So all those things that we were just talking about, no memory. Some presenting problems, well, he comes whenever he's called. Interesting. He uses hooks and chains to destroy flesh of others. Definitely not normal. He takes pleasure in the pain he inflicts on others. And he has this nice hobby of dragging his victims to hell. And he's definitely obsessed with finishing a job. He's a perfectionist. So whenever Frank gives him the slip, he keeps coming back again and again and again, because you ordered this, you're going to get it whether or not you want it at this point. So something that I always find interesting about this is with Pinhead, he's pretty observant. Rather than only attacking people who are near the cube, he only attacks the person who actually solved the cube. As far as following rules, he usually follows rules. He might change them in the middle of it, but he will. So for instance, there's this one movie, I'm part of a movie, where people actually go into hell and they have to try to solve a cube to get out of it. Granted, he bent the rules by making the cube infinitely more complicated, but he still followed the rule of, you're going to be able to get out if you do this. But then I think it was the second movie, I can't remember if it was second or third, he actually sacrifices himself for people. Second movie, just remembered. He actually sacrifices himself for humans by trying to fight the newest Cenobite so that they can escape. So not very Cenobite behavior, actually kind of human related. But don't worry, we get to that later on. So upon returning, he becomes a much more malevolent character. He actually goes from just focusing on killing the person who solved the cube to, hey, let's kill an entire club of people. Why is that? Because it's going to make me more powerful. He also then begins making promises that he breaks. And then he also feeds on random people, like literally feeds on them. And he turns otherwise innocent people into Cenobites, because what's the point of being the lead Cenobite if you can't actually have anyone to lead over? So I've got some questions regarding this. And to try to make this a little bit easier, I'm actually going to pull up those questions together. So what was Pinhead's original name in the credits of Hellraiser? And how did Pinhead earn his status of being the leader?
Well, while we wait for people to answer, Michi said, Wes Craven said that what he originally wanted to do but decided against it because of the decade. I believe that had something to do with Pinhead. Either that or it was about, I didn't want to interrupt.
Feel free to interrupt. I ramble.
Okay, fair enough. Circling back to, I believe, Freddy, one of our Visioncon correspondents asked, were his two fathers considered narcissists?
It depends. With his father, that was his actual birth father. We don't know exactly who that is, so that wouldn't count. His father, as far as Alice Cooper, you could argue that, but we'd really have to know a lot more information. And I'll be honest, I haven't gone deep enough in the comics to get that, mainly because I can't find them. So if anyone knows where to find those comics, definitely hook me up.
Okay, and the Visioncon rep circled back and said, Michi's question about what Wes Craven wanted, but it wasn't ready for the decade, she said that was actually for Freddy.
Okay.
Okay, and then...
I'm assuming that's about the pedophilia. That would probably be it.
Yes. Michi also said a lead Cenobite? Or Cenobite?
Yep, that is correct.
All
now,
right.
Here's the fun question. Because they didn't name him in the first movie. They never even say Pinhead. He only got a name later on because he became such an iconic character. But does anyone know how he actually earned the status of being the lead Cenobite in the movie franchise?
Hard work and determination.
Oh, I wish. It's actually much more hilarious and simplified. So if you've ever watched this and you look at the other Cenobites, something you'll notice is that their makeup makes it so they can't talk. He was the only one who could speak. So congratulations, leader by default. It's like showing up at the Power Rangers and wearing red. You're the automatic one. So if we're looking at this, we're going to go back to antisocial personality disorder. I'm not going to go and describe that again because I just did for Freddy, but he definitely qualifies for that. He doesn't have any regard for others. Other things we're going to want to consider with him aren't just his behaviors, but also things he says. And he has a lot of things that are interesting. So think about what kind of diagnosis this might be. Save your tears. I'll reap your sorrow slowly. I have century discovered the things that make you whimper. Also, why resist? You love this as much as I. After all, you made me. There is a world out there waiting to yield to us. So much flesh, so many different pleasures. And one of the iconic ones, oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering. So for hearing these, you'll start to notice there's an interesting tilt to this. So what are we thinking might be something that would come up diagnosis-wise? Sexual sadism. So this is something that has lasted longer than 6 months. I think it's actually lasted longer than 6 movies. They just keep making those things. Don't remember exactly how many though. But something we also get from this is we can sense that he has sexual arousal from his physical and psychological suffering of the other people. He takes a lot of pleasure in this. He invests a lot of issues in this. Now, granted, we never actually see the sexual acts, at least not in the movies I've invested time to watch, but it's something that's very heavily implied. And those desires and urges aren't just thought of, they are actually acted upon with non-consenting people. That non-consenting is important because if a person is consenting, that's a lot different. These people who are trying to run and get away with their lives, not a whole lot of consent there. Even if Frank originally gave it, he said no later on. So that's about that. Does anyone have any questions about Pinhead before I move on? Just realized I probably should have been doing that the whole time.
Oh, you're fine. Just give it a just 1 second. And Mandy Ingram said 10. I don't know if that's in response to the question, like if she has 10 questions or we'll give it a minute. I'm pretty excited about this next one, Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, you're going to laugh at the end part, I think. Or at least I always do. But then again, I might be a bit of a sadist myself.
Yeah, you know. Different strokes for different folks.
10 movies. That's what it was. 10 movies.
Okay.
That makes so much more sense. Now, there is another movie franchise I can watch all of them on. Phantasm. Every single one of those.
Okay.
Love them.
All right, I say we go ahead and just move forward.
Okay. So Frankenstein's monster is the next character. And what's interesting about this is what's his name? Well, he doesn't have one. In the original movies, no name. In the original book, no name. His parents, well, he doesn't really have any birth parents. So we're going to have to go by the man who actually physically put him together, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Now, with this one, I'll admit I know quite a bit about the backstory because I've read the book. And I'm not sure that I would do that with most franchises, but this one merited it. So Dr. Frankenstein actually became so obsessed with creating this monster that he carried around body parts in bags everywhere he traveled. So as he was going place to place, because you can't kill the body parts in one area, otherwise people are going to start noticing that graves are going missing as far as body parts are. But he takes them from place to place. Somehow this is a magical travel bag where no body parts rot and there's no deterioration. But okay. And his sole obsession with this is to create life. So he's decided he's going to piece these together and create a whole new life form. But after succeeding in something he has pushed himself so hard to do, he immediately sees with revulsion the monster he's created and he flees. So the very first thing that the monster sees when he wakes up is the only person who would have ever potentially accepted him running away. And that just continues. Also, Dr. Frankenstein frequently lapses from depression into fits. he is frequently institutionalized as far as if you're I'm reading the book, if you're even watching the film, he doesn't stay in a steady mindset. He goes place to place. He's constantly having breakdowns. Now, some personal history for the monster. The monster actually lived on the land of a family for several months. He lived there without them knowing it. He would actually observe them. He would learn from them. He actually learned to talk from them, not something you see in the movie, but something that does happen with a monster. And to them, and to him, they become the ideal family. So for someone who's rejected in every sense, he finds this place where he feels safe, where he feels secure, and he basically falls in love with the family and wants to join them. And with this, if we're going by the book, he's actually very well spoken. He's very articulate. Movie, a lot different. So with this, the monster actually attempts to approach the family. He works up this courage, and the first thing that happens is he's rejected again. So he has no one who's accepting him. Later on, he finds his father, and he tries to pressure his father, Dr. Frankenstein, to create a bride for him, not just because he wants romance, but because he wants to feel accepted in any way he can. He wants to not be the only one. Essentially, think of it like an angry unicorn. The only one, there will never be another, and definitely doesn't want to be that way. So he's very lonely. So if we're thinking about this, we have rejection, we have no self-worth as far as this goes. He has no reason to, and he's lonely. These are all huge things. Now, with this, Dr. Frankenstein actually originally agrees to make the bride for the monster. He then, however, destroys the bride. So he has this hope of not being the only one, and he sees that hope destroyed before his very eyes. So Father Year goes to anyone else because Dr. Frankenstein is the true monster in this. I will argue that point any day of the week. So the monster decides vengeance will be his. So he actually goes after and kills Dr. Frankenstein's actually bride. I don't know why it says brother. But he actually goes through and he kills the bride. He kills also the brother. Actually, yeah, he does do that. Man, it's been too long since I've read that. But he does allow all this to happen. But each time he starts toying with Dr. Frankenstein, making it more and more psychologically damaging to him. Because in a weird way, that fighting back and forth that they have is the only relationship, the only interaction that the monster has. So even if it's painful, even if it's awful, at least he's being acknowledged in some way. So even if he has to kill his stepmother, essentially, well, at least dad paid attention. So it's creating some issues. Now, he does actually flee from the pursuers of his creator. He's later, Dr. Frankenstein later contracts sicknesses and dies. And after Dr. Frankenstein dies, the monster disappears. You don't see him again. So here are some questions. I'm going to pull those up. So who was the real monster in the story? Was it the monster? Even for all the killing he was doing, even for picking up the young girl and throwing her into the water, is he really the monster? And what do you think the monster's motives and means of killing people indicates about him?
I know the answer to the first one. It's man.
Mm-hmm. The real monster in the story is man. You got one!
Woo! Nailed it!
So essentially, with this, he's a victim the entire way through. He didn't ask to be created, but once he was, he never had a single ounce of protection. And what do you think that his motives and means of killing people say is about him?
I think that I'm not nearly smart enough to give an accurate answer on that one, so I'm going to defer that to the chat. Real quick, while we wait for people to guess, Brandon Lawthorne wanted to remind us that it's pronounced Frankenstein.
That's definitely one version. A lot more dancing in that one. I think I've got a shot glass that goes with that.
Yeah. Michi said, "Poor dude, life was a living hell."
It was.
And then Matt Cook said the father for the answer to the first question.
Yeah. All accurate. Dad was definitely a jerk. Whenever that character died, I actually did a slow clap. So not something that most people did in the English class, but I felt it was warranted.
All right, I'll give it about 5 more seconds for people to guess. All right. So
Okay.
tell us.
So with that, if we think about the way he kills, he's very up close. He's very personal. He doesn't kill people from a distance. He doesn't do it in a way that's, where he's not going to be close by. He kills them with his hands. He gets up close and personal. So that actually tells us quite a bit about him. He's looking for a relationship, any relationship, even if it's only momentary. And one question I have that no one has to answer, this is just something I'm very upset about. How the heck did Dr. Frankenstein carry around body parts in a bag, traveling by train for months, and no one noticed? Like, seriously, I can't even go through an airport without getting pat down whenever I'm carrying nothing, and he can do that. That's just ridiculous. But if we're looking for a diagnosis for the monster, we can't diagnose him with anything at all. Reason for that, while his body is made up of only slightly used human parts, there's no indication that there's a previous living human soul. We don't even really know if he's human. He may be made of human, but he's not human. He's something else. So we cannot diagnose him based upon a norm that we have set for people. So he's there, but there's no way we can diagnose him because we can't use our standards to diagnose whatever he is. We would have to have an entirely new DSM for that. So he's a complete blank state. And as the monster was never truly alive, any diagnosis I could give normed off of people who are alive wouldn't really work. So that wouldn't work for him. So some additional considerations, like if I was going through and I was diagnosing a person, if I was doing all of that, whenever you're actually diagnosing someone, you would perform an in-depth forensic interview. You would want to get as much information as possible. You'd want to do an intake assessment. You would want to ask them very specific questions. You would want to be able to get as accurate as you could. You would also want to do things like any kind of tests of intelligence. Would you be doing a Stanford Binet? Would you be doing a WAIF? It's depending on their age. Are you going to be doing a WISC? It just kind of depends. You're also going to want to know what their current behaviors are, because someone's current behaviors may be very different from their past behaviors. So what is an accurate diagnosis for them now versus what would have been then? You're also going to want to see if you can observe their behaviors, because how someone presents to the person interviewing them may not be the truth. So I know that I've seen several instances where someone would act a certain way in front of me, but whenever I'd be observing them out and about, they would be completely different. So are they malingering? Are they intentionally trying to make themselves look worse? Or are they trying to make themselves look better? Those are things to consider. And sometimes you would actually consider input from other people as well. So that would be something you would do with some caution. And the reason for that is because, is that other person motivated to make them look better? Are they motivated to make them look worse? Or are they going to try to give you accurate information? So I know this is all going back to psychology, but that's one of my jams. So I like actually trying to spread that. So I just said insert funny picture because apparently I got tired that night. So there is no funny picture. It's apparently just that video of me where I look ridiculous. So that's kind of it on horror movie villains. Some random trivia I can let you know is one of the reasons horror movie villains always die at the end is in the original Hollywood, there was actually an act put in place that the villains had to die so that the viewers felt safe whenever they went home because movies were still so new. So random. Does anyone have any questions?
So while we wait for questions, I'll read off some of the comments that came in. A couple people did guess why he killed the way he did. Sarah Kane said defense/top behavior. Tracy Eaton said he wanted to make his father feel similar to the way he felt.
Lonely. If you kill the brother, if you kill the wife, that's definitely going to make him feel lonely.
Yeah. Mandy said a need for intimacy. And then she also said he'd probably something similar to a baby. And he doesn't have instilled morals and socialization, so he'd be need-based. So those were some of the comments of the later things you said.
Very good, because how can you actually have that if you've never been exposed to it? You haven't been taught it. And if we're going by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have the basic needs, which are food, shelter, emotional, and then later on we get to all that higher level. He's still at the bottom. He doesn't have any of that. See? You get all this psychology with horror movie villains that you never even thought of.
I never would have thought to dissect horror. I mean, movies in general, but horror movies especially. Bye,
Super deep.
Bye, Mandy. Enjoy your pasta. Tracy came in with the time era was not so suspicious, and if he was listed as a DR, no one would question him having body parts.
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, last year I actually talked about a serial killer who did something fairly similar. Put a doctor in front and that works.
So,
of course, if you think about it, now we have people who use doctor as a stage name, and we don't think anything about that either.
Cough, Dr. Phil, cough. So speaking of serial killers, your next panel that you're actually about to do is all about serial killers, and I gotta say, this is one of the most popular panels that we have, and one that was specifically asked for by our fans. So
awesome.
do you really want to, real quick, I'll pause the recording, or I'll stop the recording from here,